And good morning. Good morning. This is Chris Jones. I'm with the University of Arizona, Gila County Cooperative Extension, and you're here today for our Garden and Country Extension webinar series. And today we are talking about Stinknet, a weed advancing in Arizona, with Michael Chamberland. A little bit about the webinar series. It is a weekly Zoom webinar, 60 minutes or less, Thursdays at 11. We feature a variety of horticulture and natural resource topics relevant to the environmental conditions and residential concerns of Gila County and anywhere else in Arizona and the world. And the recordings are posted at the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension YouTube channel. So put that in there. You'll find the Garden and Country Extension webinar playlist, and everything we do gets put in there. And the University of Arizona is an equal opportunity affirmative action institution. So at this time, I'm gonna pull up a poll so that we can do our affirmative action work. So if you would take a moment, please, to just indicate whether you're 18 years or older, your gender, and your ethnic group. I'm going to leave that up for a few minutes here while we get back into the slides. And that's just important information that Michael and I need to report. All right. Just jumped out of that there. Okay, so here's our agenda today. The topic is Stinknet, a weed advancing in Arizona. Thank you for joining us early. At 11 o'clock here, I'm doing the welcome. My name is Chris Jones. I'm your moderator. Here in a moment, we'll have Michael Chamberland talking about Stinknet. He has about a half hour, maybe a little longer presentation on this weed. And then we'll start our chat box discussion with Michael. And we will look to finish up here at noon, as we always do. Here is our presenter. Michael is an assistant extension agent of urban horticulture programs at the University of Arizona, Maricopa County Cooperative Extension. So Michael, welcome. It's great to have you with us today. And gonna hand that over to you and just let you get in there. So here, we're ready.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Chris. And I will just jump into this discussion of Stinknet, a weed advancing in Arizona. Stinknet,
Michael, I need you to share your screen again.
Okay, let me get that re-engaged. All right, how does that look?
You are all set to go. Perfect.
All right. So Stinknet, or Onchocyphon pilulifer, is an invasive exotic annual weed species, which has quickly emerged as a significant problem in Arizona. Public awareness of Stinknet is essential. Some people unaware this is an invasive species may regard it as a pretty wildflower. An example illustrated here is this feature photo of the Cave Creek Regional Park on TripAdvisor, and those pretty flowers in the foreground meant to make this look like a nice, pretty desert setting. That's actually all invasive Stinknet in the foreground there. I believe people are working to get this image changed. So let's take a quick review of Stinknet's overall appearance. In this photo are large, robust Stinknet plants in bloom, and those yellow balls are clusters of very tiny flowers. Stinknet is a member of the sunflower family, and it is typical of this family to make blooms which are actually a tight cluster of very small flowers. In this close-up photo, you may be able to see some of the open flowers together with the closed flower buds higher up on the sphere. Altogether, this comprises the spherical flower head. Each tiny flower can mature into a single seed, and the entire spherical flower head has the potential to make over 100 seeds. Young stinknet plant seedlings have a rosette of finely divided leaves. At this stage, these plants might be confused with seedlings of some native Arizona plants, but stinknet has a distinctive odor when the leaves are crushed. It's been compared to turpentine. These are older stinknet plants which have begun to bolt with upright stems, and they're beginning to show the signs of flowering, the flower head starting to develop at the end of those stems. This is an infested area near Anthem, Arizona, in the north part of the Phoenix metro area. All of the yellow flowers in the photo are stinknet. Note the large stinknet plants approaching the size of small shrubs near the center of the photo, and comparatively smaller plants below them in the foreground. Stinknet can potentially have multiple germination episodes from the soil seed bank during the course of the winter. Should significant rainfall come in midwinter, another round of germination may occur. The small stinknet plants are probably not undernourished, but rather a later flush of germination, and they're smaller because they have had less time to mature during the cool growing season. During dry winters, such as the one we just had, or winters with a late rainfall, stinknet may grow to be no more than a few inches tall, sometimes with one or just a few small ball-shaped flower heads. These diminutive plants may not be immediately recognized by people who are accustomed to the larger, more robust plants. These undersized plants would seem to be less of a menace, but they still produce seeds and can contribute to the spread of stinknet. During dry winters, stinknet seeds that are present in the soil seed bank may not germinate and may remain as dormant seeds in the soil. After setting seeds, the stinknet plants will die. This is a dead stinknet plant with seed heads on it. These are the same yellow balls or flower heads which have now matured to a tan color, and each of these balls or seed heads is a cluster of seeds held loosely enough to break apart if the plant is disturbed, but they're held together tightly enough so that moderate wind and rain doesn't break up the seed heads. The seed heads will stay on the plant, sometimes for months and potentially for over a year, while waiting for a disturbance that will break them loose and also likely carry the seeds away at the same time. The spherical seed heads are fragile and will crumble, releasing the seeds. However, we are seeing in some areas dry, dead stinknet plants which have held their seeds for over a year now. Stinknet seeds are very tiny, less than a millimeter long. In this photo, the actual seeds are the dark tip on each of these little slivers. The paler part of each sliver is the dried corolla, the petals of the individual flower. Stinknet is native to South Africa. Remember that plants which are invasive exotic species in some parts of the world still have a native range elsewhere in the world. This is important because it's in South Africa that natural predators and potential biological control agents might be found to control stinknet. Biological control is a possibility for defense against stinknet, since this genus Onchocyphon that it belongs to is not a part of the native North American flora. There's a possibility an insect or fungal pest might be found which specifically attacks stinknet but won't affect other plants. So take a look at this map of the distribution of stinknet in South Africa, and I'm going to move on to another map of South Africa, so try to match it up on your mind. In this color map of the rainfall regimes of South Africa, Note the winter rainfall zone in South Africa is located on the west coast and depicted in blue, while areas of central and northern parts of the country have less winter rainfall. Now, in the prior map of stinknet distribution, we saw that stinknet had a wide range all across southern Africa, or South Africa in particular. And we can see here when that is compared with the rainfall pattern, we see it growing across a lot of different kinds of rainfall regimes, including some of these areas that are more prone to a biseasonal or summer rainfall. Now, we've been characterizing stinknet as a winter annual, which only grows with winter rain, because that's what we've been noticing in Arizona. But this and other evidence lets us to wonder whether it has the capacity to grow with summer rainfall as well. Here's a picture of stinknet that was coming into bloom in November of 2020 in a burned area in Cave Creek. This area was receiving irrigation from a golf course, and this suggests that for it to have matured and coming close to flower by November, that this must have germinated and started growing in late summer, earlier than is expected. So we have to wonder whether stinknet has the potential to germinate with our summer monsoon rains and get an earlier start. Stinknet distribution in Arizona is currently mapped by SciNet and other mapping efforts. This map shows SciNet's mapped North American accounts of stinknet. It is documented in Arizona as far north as the Sedona Oak Creek area and as far south as Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. An observation has been reported from Hermosillo, Sonora, deep into the state of Sonora. Also, take note of the large gap that exists between the California and Arizona areas of infestation. Some of these populations on the map have likely been treated and hopefully are no longer present, such as some of those dots around Organ Pipe and some of those in Tucson. You'll see that other mapping efforts may differ in their recorded occurrence of stinknet, which has also been reported from farther north in California now and also in the Las Vegas area. And these differences between different maps for stinknet probably reflect different data sets which have not been shared between projects, rather than misidentifications of stinknet that I've noticed have been showing up on iNaturalist. Stinknet is a name we recommend to replace an earlier name, globe chamomile, which is being used for this plant. The name stinknet better emphasizes the undesirable nature of the weed and is consistent with the name that has been used in California. The name Oncocyphon pilulifer may be new to many people. The name Oncocyphon piluliferum has been most used for stinknet, but examinations of the rules of nomenclature behind the naming of plants is suggesting that this shorter name is the correct one, and we're rapidly seeing this being adopted. Thanks to efforts of the Southwest Vegetation Management Association, stinknet was added to the Arizona State Noxious Weed List in January 2020. In being added to the State Noxious Weed List, this shows that the Arizona Department of Agriculture recognizes this weed as a significant detriment to agriculture and the environment in Arizona. So some of the stinknet issues: competition. Stinknet threatens to displace native plants, especially cool season growing native wildflowers, which share the same seasonal life cycle as stinknet. Stinknet issues with fire. Heavy rains during the winters of 2019 and 2020 produced a lot of robust growth of stinknet in Maricopa County. And all this growth dried and provided tinder for wildfire during an exceptionally dry spring and summer of 2020. This is a picture up near New River, Arizona, a large area infested with stinknet. Various brush fires occurred in spring and summer of 2020 on the edge of the Phoenix metro area and in natural areas that are adjacent to the metro area. Now, these burns are shown in gray in this InsaWeb map. This spring, observers have noticed stinknet has germinated and is growing, returning in these burned areas. And this is in spite of the winter drought we've been experiencing. The Aquila fire burned in the Phoenix Sonoran Preserve, adjacent to the Tramonto community of Phoenix. And this is south of Anthem. And it caused substantial destruction. Here I've attempted some repeat photography matching a burn site I photographed with a Google Street View from the same general area along North 27th Avenue. And this is a northern branch of the Phoenix Sonoran Preserve. The Aquila fire aftermath in the Phoenix Sonoran Preserve with dead or severely damaged saguaro and desert trees. Now, saguaro in that condition is pretty unlikely to survive. And this is the west side of North 27th Avenue, the opposite side of the road. The road served as a fire break, but you can see an indication here of the density of stinknet that is present in this area. Now, stinknet close up to residential properties like this does present a severe fire hazard. The dry winter of 2021 yielded small stinknet plants, usually in depressions where rainwater collected from our few rains that we received. Away from these areas, stinknet may not have germinated at all, or it may have germinated and then not survived to reach maturity. The tiny plants typical during this year, during this spring, may be less of a fire danger. However, in some areas, dried stinknet remains from the wet winter of 2020 and may still be contributing to fuel for fire during this upcoming spring and summer. Meanwhile, stinknet that was growing in irrigated locations in the urban area grew to full size during this dry winter. And it leads us to wonder, do urban infestations, the urban presence of stinknet, does that sort of provide a refugium for this plant during drought when these irrigated plants are able to continue to provide seeds? You may be wondering, why are we experiencing invasive weed issues during a time of record drought in Arizona? Why do we have so many of these plants growing during a time of drought? Well, stinknet has advanced its spread from first occurrence to our present situation over the span of what has been described as a 20-year drought. And it's within that 20-year period that stinknet has done this expansion. Invasive exotic species have an advantage that they're free from predators and pests that they would have had to deal with in their native habitat. And this situation is regardless of drought. Now, during drought, our native plants can be stressed by drought, and they also may be eaten more intensively by our native herbivores that naturally would eat those plants. A plant like stinknet that's widely considered to be unpalatable and largely unconsumed by wildlife, insects, or livestock has a considerable advantage in drought. I took a picture a couple days ago of these native soap tree yuccas, which are getting eaten up by native herbivores during our current drought. Now imagine the advantage that an unpalatable plant, an unpalatable invasive plant that's moving into the area will have if it is left alone. Stinknet may also have a life cycle characteristic that makes it well adapted to drought and to competition with native plants. The drought also is a dry condition that promotes fire, and a plant that shows adaptations to a fire regime has an advantage, particularly in our desert areas which are not adapted to fire regimes. Another stinknet issue is allergies. Allergic reactions to stinknet have been reported. Both respiratory distress and contact dermatitis have been reported. These seem to arise from contact or proximity to large plants in bloom or entire fields of blooming plants. apparently not so much with dried stinknet. Now, these effects have not been examined or medically characterized. Allergic reactions warrant caution when handling or removing stinknet. This can be a concern when weed whacking or pulling stinknet. Wear gloves and pay attention to any developing reactions. Reactions are most likely to be expected with encounters with the green growing plants, especially the large mature flowering plants. I've not heard of allergies in association with working with the dried stinknet or its seeds. So bundles of stinknet have showing up in Phoenix area farmers markets being sold as wild chamomile. Now, hopefully the growing public awareness of stinknet has put this to a stop, particularly in regard to the allergies that people have been reporting with the plant. Stinknet control. There are aspects of stinknet biology that offer us prospects, that give us prospects for mechanical controls. Stinknet is fairly easily recognized and it's conspicuous. Stinknet has to grow upright and bolt before it's able to flower. Stinknet must flower before it sets seed. And stinknet has no perennial structures which survive for more than a year. It depends entirely on seed for reproduction. It is most important to eliminate stinknet before it goes to seed. Stinknet has been acting as a cool season growing annual, and all stinknet plants will die with the summer heat in the desert. The plant persists through viable seeds that remain in the environment. Stinknet does not have an extensive root system. The plants may be easily pulled, at least if the soil is moist. Now, obviously, this is only practical for small outbreaks, or small infestations. And small stinknet plants may go unnoticed, or people may not reach to pull them. Again, use caution concerning allergies with this kind of interaction with the plant. Stinknet can be weed whacked to stop it from flowering. The plants will regrow from the base after this, but it does purchase you some time. So if the plant is in imminent danger of starting to bloom, the weed whacking it will put a stop to that. The plants will regrow most times from the base, so the weed whacking doesn't kill it. And that regrowth will also be attempting to flower as soon as it can as well. Sometimes the regrowth can be more oppressed to the soil and not immediately growing upright again, making a second round of weed whacking a little bit harder to do. But this is just a good way to help suppress the plant. It doesn't actually kill it, but it'll suppress it. And if you can continue taking measures to beat these plants down, once the heat of summer arrives, then that will kill them naturally. Again, beware of the possibility of allergies because torn or ripped stinknet foliage is especially likely to be releasing that stinky odor if that is what is causing the allergies for people. So these weed whack stinknet stems will fall to the ground, and generally they can be left on the ground because they do not appear to mature and set seed if they're weed whacked at this time. However, if your stinknet has already been flowering and is about to start setting seeds, then all bets are off whether those fallen stems might be able to go ahead and set seed. We don't really know exactly at what time during that color change of those flower heads to seed heads, when during that period the seeds actually become fully mature and viable. It may not correspond exactly with that color change. A hula hoe or rake can be very effective for eliminating weed seedlings from residential scale properties, especially in gravel mulched landscapes. So this is a picture of a hula hoe. A vigorous back and forth motion through the gravel will chop off seedlings at the roots, and stinknet will not regrow from its roots. though it may regrow from a stem that's still left attached to the roots, as what happens when you weed whack them. So using a hula hoe is really the best recommendation for combating weeds in residential situations and small infestations. It could take a little time, but it's also a good workout. And it's most effective against young seedlings. It does become impractical against larger and strongly rooted weeds. So you really want to use the hula hoe to combat stinknet when they are still small developing seedlings and long before they start getting around to flower, especially if they are larger, robust plants. So everyone is interested in herbicides to control stinknets, and research is underway to determine the best approach for herbicide control. Kai Umeda, turfgrass agent with Maricopa County Cooperative Extension, has conducted trials of post-emergent stinknet herbicide controls. He's found that glyphosate, the active ingredient in products such as Roundup and other herbicide brands, has shown effectiveness in Arizona for this post-emergent stinknet control. He notes that during cool weather, glyphosate may require up to 42 days to show its full effect. That's because glyphosate is a slow-acting herbicide. Because it kills the plant slowly, the plant is able to transport that herbicide all through the plant down to the roots before it starts killing the plant, and that overall makes the herbicide more effective, even if it takes a little bit longer for that effect to happen. Kai's study showed effective control with prize fighter, the active ingredient being ammonium nanoate, reward, the active ingredient being diquat, finale, the active ingredient being glufosinate, and Roundup Pro concentrate, which is one of the different brands of herbicides containing glyphosate as the active ingredient. Weed control for these different herbicides tended to require different amounts of time depending on the herbicide before they would show effect. Now, people often like to see an immediate effect of an herbicide, but those that take longer will still effectively kill the plant. These trials were conducted on non-landscaped bare ground. Keep in mind that herbicides will kill most other plants they come in contact with, including desirable plants. A study by Rodriguez, Bean, McDonald, and Larios from UC Riverside showed transline herbicide as the most effective herbicide for post-emergent stinknet control at their 3 study sites in Riverside County. The active ingredient in transline is clopyralid. There's an interest in organic or natural herbicides. These are herbicides with active ingredients such as vinegar, pelargonic acid, or ammonium nanoate. Many of these products work by stripping away the cuticle, or they compromise the plant epidermis or membranes, causing the plant to dry out in the desert environment. And many of these herbicide products will impact stinknet, but they do tend to be less powerful than conventional herbicides. They may only kill small seedlings. And if you try to use them on older plants, you may find that they burn and impact the older plant, but they don't kill it, and the plant lives to then regrow from the base. Also, never use table salt to kill weeds. I am frequently asked what to spray to eliminate stinknet from acres of natural Sonoran desert vegetation, which has become infested with stinknet. Now, people do want an easy, simple, one-shot answer that's packaged in a spray bottle. I can't recommend a chemical that you can go and buy and DIY treat acres of desert environment without causing environmental impacts. Once weeds are entrenched among native plants, there's rarely a simple chemical application that will kill the weeds and leave native plants and animals unharmed. Now, overall, this is a big reason why invasive species are a serious problem to begin with. They're an ecosystem level problem. And this is why we would like to stop invasive species before they reach this level of infestation, like you see in this picture. Selective herbicides. You may have heard about selective herbicides, which are herbicides which kill only certain plants and not others. This selectivity is a real phenomenon for certain herbicide products, but only across broad plant groups, such as differentiating grasses from broadleaf weeds. There is no herbicide which selectively kills stinknet and does not harm other plants, nor can we realistically expect any such chemical to be developed. Selective herbicides. Most of the selectivity possible with herbicides is achieved by applying herbicides at a critical time during the target weed's life cycle. A low dose of a certain herbicide may kill weed seedlings in their early growth stage, while at the same time that application may be insufficient to kill surrounding native perennial plants, even though the same chemical applied differently would kill those perennials. Applying herbicides to stinknet at the stage shown in this photo has a high potential to kill these seedlings while presenting minimal danger to other established plants if it's done correctly. So the timing is essential, as these little seedlings will be much easier killed than adult flowering stinknet. Unfortunately, it's generally the adult flowering stinknet that people notice, and they're probably not out looking for the very young stinknet seedlings when they first come up. Effective herbicide use depends on much more than choosing the correct chemical. Proper identification of the weed and understanding of the weed's life cycle, knowing when it's growing and when it's vulnerable. Size and growth stage of the weed. Weeds are typically most vulnerable when they are actively growing and young seedlings. A state of active growth. You may think it would be best to spray a weed when it is stressed or dried out, but actually the best time to apply herbicide is when the weed is healthy and actively growing, especially if it's an herbicide like glyphosate that counts on the plant distributing the herbicide throughout the plant before the herbicide starts killing the plant. Weather and wind. Herbicides are best applied under optimal growing weather for the plant and not when it is windy, which can cause drift of sprayed herbicides. And proper application. There's a lot of subtlety to application, including choice of sprayer nozzle, addition of adjuvants, as well as wearing, of course, the proper PPE, personal protective equipment, that's required for the herbicide, and doing this in an environment that is specified and consistent with the environment that is allowed for this herbicide as specified on the label. Now, all of these matters support hiring an experienced professional who can evaluate the situation and has access to the proper tools to do the herbicide application. Pre-emergent herbicides, or pre-emergents, are chemicals that are applied to the soil to stop weed seed germination. Now, pre-emergent herbicides do not kill seeds. They actually kill seedlings, but very early in the initial stage of germination, where there's a lot of metabolic processes, unique metabolic processes that are happening during that germination of the seed. Now, as a result, these pre-emergents will result in you do not see seedlings develop and become visible in the landscape because it has killed these at the time of germination. Pre-emergent herbicides have the potential to not harm actively growing plants and only killing seedlings in the initial period of germination. This selectivity against germinating seedlings without impacting existing plants is a very useful property of many pre-emergent herbicides. Also keep in mind that some herbicide products are actually cocktails or mixtures of both pre-emergent and post-emergent herbicides. And that's the case with certain herbicides that promise to kill existing weeds and also have an extended control. Now, pre-emergent herbicides can seem benign because they do not harm growing plants. However, in order for pre-emergent herbicides to work, they require certain chemical properties, such as a long period of active effect in the soil and a disinclination to binding with soil particles. And this renders that chemical mobile and subject to leaching from the application area. As a result, there can be some strict regulations concerning pre-emergent herbicide use, in spite of their otherwise benign seeming reputation. Pre-emergent herbicides have the potential to not harm actively growing plants. As a result, pre-emergent herbicides usually do not harm seedlings which have already germinated and completed that germination process and are now behaving like little plants that they are. So it's essential to put down pre-emergence before weed seedlings have appeared. If you can see weed seedlings, it's too late for pre-emergent control. However, this is an ideal time for post-emergent weed control using post-emergent herbicides. And you could also use pre-emergence to suppress any additional future seed germination. It's just too late for the ones that are already up and green and growing. Pre-emergent herbicides have a good potential to suppress the germination of stinknet seedlings, and herbicides of this type will likely become an important tool in combating stinknet. The proper use of pre-emergence against stinknet continues to be an area of study by researchers in and outside of academia in both Arizona and California. A study by Rodriguez, Bean, McDonald, and Larios from UC Riverside showed a pre-emergent herbicide control strategy was most effective at reducing stinknet cover at their 3 study sites, with Esplanade showing the best pre-emergent control. The active ingredient in Esplanade is indaziflam. They note that pre-emergent strategies significantly altered cover type, with species dominating cover post-herbicide treatment. Now remember that they're treating weeds in a different environment, a different climate in Riverside County. So we might experience different effects here in the Sonoran Desert. I strongly recommend working with a professional certified pesticide applicator to develop a plan to treat difficult or extensive weed infestations, those kind of infestations that are beyond your ability to attack with a hula hoe and other mechanical means. A few other points about herbicides. Now, herbicides will only kill living, growing plants, and they do not kill seeds. Herbicides will not remove dead brush. Large weeds killed by herbicides will remain standing on the site and could even be a fire fuel. All the more reason for tackling these weeds when they're younger. Herbicide chemicals will not kill seeds on top of these dried stinknet plants, like you see in the photo. This dried brush will eventually crumble and decompose, but until then, when it's standing, it can be a fire hazard, and it's recommended to physically remove this brush from the vicinity around structures and homes. In Cooperative Extension, we help to answer questions from the public about their garden and landscape plant problems. We've received many calls about sick or deformed plants and have determined that many of these result from improper herbicide use in landscape environments. Often herbicides were used to control annual weeds, such as stinknet, and later show up poisoning trees and shrubs. And then people come to us about wondering what's wrong with their trees and shrubs. Herbicide effects can be seen as abnormal prolific branching, stunted plants, scorched, or of course dead plants. A telltale sign that these problems can be herbicide related is when similar symptoms appear on different unrelated plants within a landscape. These problems may often be related to products applied to the soil, claiming to have an extended action or long-term weed suppression in the soil. These kinds of pre-emergent herbicides, often classified as soil sterilants, should be discouraged from use in most landscapes. These problems we see here may have resulted from improper use or possibly over-application of the herbicide product. Future control methods against stinknet can be expected to involve integrated pest management techniques, or IPM, likely involving heightened public awareness, vigilant mechanical removal of weeds, careful sanitation, clearing of dried brush, and selective use of herbicides. For instance, attention to the use of clean soil and gravel for landscaping and construction. Don't ship out soil from soil piles like you see here, where these soil piles have gotten covered with stinknet and are now in seed and will have contaminated the soil or gravel with stinknet seed. You certainly don't want to take this gravel and spread it over your landscape as a landscaping gravel. All right, so that is the end of my presentation, and I'll just show you a couple sites where you can find some additional information about stinknet. Here are two sites you can download from the web. You might not be able to take advantage of these hyperlinks here, but if you do a web search on the titles, you should be able to come up with them. Stinknet, a weed advancing in Southern Arizona, is an extension publication that I wrote. And The Short Journey from Stinknet Introduction and Spread to Eruptive Explosion in Arizona is a chapter within the newsletter of the Arizona Native Plant Society. And this chapter is written by John Schuring and myself. And it's in the Plant Press. You can find that as a PDF available from the Arizona Native Plant Society. Also in print, I don't think this is available online, but if you can seek out this issue of Desert Plants, volume 36, number 1, an article here on stinknet, a new invasive non-native plant in the southwestern United States. And this offers a more lengthy study of stinknet, including some interesting details about efforts to control it in Arizona. Well, thank you for attending, and we'll move back to Chris now.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. And I just took a moment here to put the Stinknet Extension Bulletin by Michael Chamberland into the chat box. So people are able to go in there and click on it and get to your fine publication. And excellent presentation. I think people should say, nice work, Michael. I do.
Thank you.
I appreciate you getting into some of the issues about using herbicides that, you know, may or may not have had to been part of talking about the stinknet, but certainly great information for us to know. And so we've got a few questions coming up already. And one person wants to know is, has it made it to Yavapai County? I'd like to know is, has it made it to Gila County? So what do you know about its spread in the state?
Yeah, it has made it to both Gila and Yavapai County. And I've not seen it in Yavapai County. I have seen it in Gila County. Where I've seen it was along I-60, just to the east of Apache Junction. And it often shows up first along highways and major roads. Now, whether it really shows up first there or that's just where people notice it, it does seem to move with the wind and possibly with vehicles. I think especially if vehicles pull onto the shoulder of the road into a big patch of it, then they drive on, they'll be shedding seeds in the process. But you know, often it's as we're driving on other business and notice these yellow blurs along the side of the road that we are.
Yes. Who's got time for that?
But that SciNet mapping effort, if you keep following SciNet, it might take some time for some of those occurrences to be mapped there. but there are other mapping initiatives as well. The Tucson Audubon Society is doing some mapping of stinknet. So people are working on it. And we do hope, in talking with some weed management groups, there is interest in a more concerted effort to be mapping these with weed management in mind.
Good. When we were getting started here, I was talking a little bit about the concepts of early detection and rapid response. That would be good in counties like Yavapai and Gila County, where it hasn't put in a foothold like Maricopa. We haven't really been able to sustain cooperative weed management areas, and just, you know, the funding, the ability to do that. So just thinking about, what are your ideas on informal ways that we're able to just get our eyes out there, monitor it, and jump on it? You know, just take that, your own responsibility to say, I can put that into a bag and get rid of it.
Yeah, there are organizations, the Arizona Native Plant Society, although it's you know, chiefly oriented towards native plants, is also very involved with the weed issues, because the weed issues really directly impact the native plants as well. There are other organizations such as CASCA through the Desert Botanical Garden and the Southwest Vegetation Management Association. There are a lot of associations out there, and depending on where you're located, you may find one closer to your area. Also for master gardeners and people who work closely with cooperative extension. Certainly I'm involved with weeds in Maricopa County, and I think each of the agents have their ear to the ground as far as weed issues in their respective counties.
And I understand the natural resource conservation districts tend to be pretty involved with it, and kind of a natural for a weed management area, but it takes funding and interest to make it effective.
As well as managers for natural areas,
mm-hmm.
And the municipalities that might be managing some of these natural areas. They too are knowledgeable about it. And I've been noting more and more brochures and information packets, web pages are coming out, you know, often from some of these natural areas, and people might find it most effective to work locally and to, you know, work with the manager of the natural area that's closer to where you live and is probably where you're most often hiking or exploring.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. Let's jump into some of these questions. Bill Maines is asking, can it be controlled with targeted grazing of sheep or goats, as Kathy Voth on pastures suggests?
So the general, what I've generally heard is that livestock tend to avoid it. But I haven't, you know, really seen any research or any, you know, good information about it, about the interaction with livestock. So the first question would be, will livestock actually eat it, or are they going to go for something else and ignore this until it's the last thing standing? So we're still looking for more information, and with cooperative extension, that is something that, you know, the range component of extension should hopefully become interested in that interaction.
It's interesting what you can get sheep and goats to eat. There are other people who know sheep and goats better than me. And perhaps it'd be worthwhile seeing in South Africa if that's a control method. But
yeah.
We've had some really interesting stuff about using sheep and goats for firewise and fire mitigation, and it just hasn't been able to take hold in Arizona. This is a hard place to be a sheep or a goat. Okay, so Joe Glab says, do you know if birds eat the seeds?
I should mention another anecdote I've heard is that that the stinknet odor can taint the flavor of milk from animals that have eaten it. Now that does suggest that they have eaten it, so they haven't avoided it entirely. But there's the chance that if livestock do resort to eating it, that it might render their milk unusable, or at least kind of sketchy. So birds, you know, those seeds are so tiny, I think that they don't really offer much for birds to be eating. So, you know, like I mentioned, interestingly, some people with the Tucson Audubon Society have been mapping this plant, but I don't think it's in relation to birds eating or spreading seed.
And one of the main problems we have with these non-native plants, they don't have the same predatory or herbivory or different type of things that they may have back in their native land. So Marion says, is there an issue for first responders when there are fire evacuations? I mean, any toxic smoke or what, I don't know.
Yeah, that also is an area that we don't have information on, whether any of these allergenic effects, we really don't even have characterized what these allergy effects are from the live growing plants. The nature of smoke coming from the dried plants is even more of a mystery at this time. So I can't really say anything definitive about that.
Okay, and Thomas Day confirms he's recently founded in Tonto Basin. So Tom, please reach out to me. I'd be interested in getting out there and doing a little monitoring and seeing if there's something we can do about it. Yeah, okay, thank you for sharing that. Susan says, is the use of a hula hoe or weed whacker on the desert floor disturbing to the natural desert soil crust or contributing to the issue? These are sometimes the only way to remove from areas around perimeters of housings and yards.
Yeah, it certainly will disturb the desert crust, and it will kill native wildflowers. But it's a trade-off. If you can kill the stinknet, it requires an evaluation of the environment. Generally, in a residential landscape, especially close to the house, that's the area that you most need to suppress weeds. You might even need to suppress certain native plants if they are large and drying out. And that'll be a different situation, the residential situation being different from out in native and otherwise intact desert. So I would definitely say that use the hula hoe around the house, in the yard, in those areas, especially where it's been essentially an artificial landscape. You might have gravel put down for decorative purposes. And it will take its toll on native wildflower seeds, but one can generally go out and reseed with the native wildflowers and let those grow up intentionally. Working out in the open desert, well, there the hula hoe probably is not going to be an approach that people will take unless they're dealing with just a very small patch of stinknet seedlings.
I appreciate Susan's question because I wanted to mention, I'm a Valley native and I remember creosote, and we understood that to be allelopathic. It had ability to put some chemicals in the ground, discourage the growth of other plants around it. And now, we're seeing all these non-native winter annuals come in. They go right into the creosote. That wasn't the case 30 years ago. Is it that loss of the natural of that soil crust? Is it just the way the time these are growing that it overcomes the allelopathy, or do you have any comment or thought on that?
Well, allelopathy has not been really intensively studied. So I have heard creosote is one of those plants that is often suggested as being a allelopathic plant, but then I frequently see cacti and other little plants growing under the creosote bush. And the desert crust, again, is also a bit mysterious. I have to wonder whether our prolonged drought may have its effect on the soil crust, may even have its effect on the chemicals that the creosote bush is producing. But these are broader ecological questions of the effect of drought.
Yeah, we're just speculating, of course. Yeah. but certainly with the way this drought has been pushing the past, particularly the last 10 to 15 years, the frequency of the dust storms and haboobs just seemed to be much larger than what I recall as a child. Not to say they didn't happen, but they weren't as frequent or as big as they were as we see these days. Marion comments, could you post a list of all the places he mentioned that might be involved in abatement? Do you I'm not too sure. Do you understand that question, or maybe there's a direction? Do you have a publication along that line?
No, in my publication, actually, which was one of the early ones about Stinknet, actually, my publication was done before many of the experiments regarding herbicides and other controls came out. So now we are getting a little bit more information. I shared some of that information from Kai. And actually, Kai has posted some of his, the results of his herbicide trials. Did those emails go to you, Chris? Do you have that link?
I'll have to double check on that.
Mm-hmm. So maybe the person with the question, if we could get out a link to Kai's trial information, that might be.
And Marion, would you be kind enough to send me and or Michael an email when we are able to kind of look at that question and be able to get you a response a little more readily than in the middle of the webinar? I think that'd be perfect if you can. And I know my emails were associated with all of my things. I'll go ahead and put it in there so you got it.
And keep in mind that Kai's herbicide trial was done in a retention basin that was basically just bare soil with weeds coming up. So he wasn't looking at, he was looking at herbicide effects on Stinknet alone. So the issue of Stinknet growing in the desert or in a garden mixed with other plants is a whole other matter. Because we know that stage of herbicides, it's not a problem with that finding something that will kill Stinknet. The question is, what can we do to kill Stinknet while still leaving desirable plants and the natural environment unharmed?
Yeah, there you go. So Rahab is asking, in the flowering stage before seed formation, can we pull it up and leave it in place, or does it need to be bagged and removed? For example, when hiking to superstitions.
Yeah, bagging and removing it would be preferable, but if you're in a place where that can't be done, from my observations so far, if you pull it before those flowers have matured and started to turn that tan color, then they're likely to just turn, just to dry out and not go ahead and mature and form seeds. Actually, it can make a nice little dried flower arrangement. Because not that I'm encouraging people to do it, but very often what happens, if you're a botanist and you're collecting members of the sunflower family and putting them in a plant press as a specimen, very often you'll see that the flower, you might collect a flower, and then when you open up the plant press to look at the dried plant, it's all gone to seed. So a lot of composites will respond to being picked or cut or weed whacked with just immediately going to seed, and they have that capacity to do it. We don't really see that happening with Stinknet, although maybe over time it might adapt and start being better able to do that.
I'd appreciate Rahab's question that yes, please do pull those seeds before they come up. If you're hiking the superstitions, that's got to be better than letting it go to maturity. Yeah. And Ginny's asking, could you please share a mapping tool where we can help document where Stinknet is growing? She, like iNaturalist, or do you know something else she could work with?
So among the weed control people, we have been looking at a program called EdMaps. And that is another mapping application. There are lots of different mapping applications out there. EdMaps is one of the ones that is designed specifically for the kind of work that weed control managers and weed control efforts would be using. It doesn't have the big user base. So iNaturalist has a large user base, but it's more of a social media platform. And when I looked at iNaturalist, I saw all kinds of misidentified plants being called Stinknet from all across the globe. So a quick look at iNaturalist and say, oh, Stinknet's all over Europe. But then when you look at the pictures that they have that are supposed to be Stinknet, it's not that, or it's just something you can't even see. It's just a blurry photo. So
hey, Michael, would you do us a favor and just quickly write that into the chat box, send it out to the panelists and to the attendees, and then we'll get it. But thanks, yeah, having a good one to share with. And so that's good advice. And there you go. So Thomas out in Tonto Basin is saying how to dispose of the Stinknet after bagging it. He's concerned that if he just sends it to the landfill, you know, it's just going to be at the landfill like lots of our weeds are. What do you suggest?
Weed control managers recommend that you bag weeds and send them to the landfill. And so I don't know a whole lot about landfill management, but I think the idea is that items sent to the landfill are likely to be deeply interred in the landfill. And these tiny seeds, unless they're just right on the surface of the soil, if they're buried 2 feet in the landfill, they're done for. That little seedling cannot come up under 2 feet of waste material.
When I observe how our landfills are covered, I think there's a good chance that a little seed like that has a great opportunity to escape. He mentioned bleach, which I don't really like that idea. Mm-hmm. Out in Tonto Basin, and now that it's May, burning is probably not a great idea. I'm kind of stumped on that question. So, but I think the best answer that we have for the time being is the landfill.
Yeah. So so the landfill, it's not a perfect solution, but that is what the weed literature suggests doing. Now, you could probably take matters into your own hands and do some kind of like deliberate composting. If you kept these seeds wet and put a layer of, but you'd have to do it on your own property. You might be able to create your own little disposal operation with a large trash can where you did a semi-composting silage kind of operation to get rid of it. But that may be more effective technically at killing and removing the seeds, but it's an operation to try to consider that.
Well, at this time, I'm going to close down our presentation here. Thank you very much, Mike. If we got a few more questions, I'm going to go ahead and have those, Mike reply to those before he leaves. But I just want to close the show. I'm going to do my last slides here. Here's our presenter, Michael Chamberland. Thank you very much, Michael. Great presentation. Appreciate all of the herbicide information you shared. We just had our Q&A. Thank you so much. And just to let you, those of us who are still here, next week we'll be back. We're going to meet with Timothy Trent, who owns and operates the Wagon Vineyard and Estate. The title is A Vineyard and Agritourism in Globe, Arizona. And so if you haven't been out to Tim's place, Tim's Wagon Vineyard, it's really kind of a neat thing he's been able to do, because who would have thought we'd have a vineyard in Globe, Arizona. So with that, everybody have a good day, and we'll see you next week.